Weeks turned into months, and the world slowly began to grapple with the truth about Project Chimera. The scandal dominated headlines, sparking debates in governments, universities, and homes around the globe. Victor Lang's arrest was just the beginning. Investigations revealed a web of corruption that stretched far beyond him, implicating high-ranking officials, defense contractors, and even parts of the military itself. While justice seemed slow, it felt inevitable. For Ethan and Claire, life had changed forever. They became reluctant heroes, their faces appearing on news programs and magazine covers. People praised them for their bravery, but they didn't feel like heroes. Instead, they carried the weight of what they'd seen. The blank stares of soldiers robbed of their humanity, the young man executed in the woods, and the countless lives shattered by Project Chimera. It wasn't glory they wanted, it was change. Determined to make a difference, they founded an organization called Restoration Hope, aimed at helping the victims of unethical experiments. With Sam's guidance and support from Sheriff Lewis, they converted an old community center into a rehabilitation facility. Soldiers who had been part of Project Chimera were brought there, given medical care, counseling, and a chance to rebuild their lives. Many struggled to adjust. Some couldn't speak, while others lashed out in confusion. But progress, no matter how small, gave Ethan and Claire hope. Claire threw herself into research, working with scientists and doctors to understand the neural implants used in the program. She hoped to find ways to reverse or mitigate their effects. It was painstaking work, filled with setbacks, but she refused to give up. "If we can undo even one piece of the damage they caused," she told Ethan one evening, "it'll be worth it." Ethan, meanwhile, focused on advocacy. He traveled across the country, speaking at rallies and meeting with lawmakers to push for stricter regulations on military experiments. His speeches were raw and honest, drawing on his own experiences to highlight the dangers of sacrificing morality for power. Though he wasn't a natural public speaker, his sincerity resonated with audiences, inspiring many to join the cause. Despite their efforts, the scars of Project Chimera lingered. Some soldiers never recovered fully, their minds trapped between humanity and machine. Others chose to disappear, unable to face a world that had betrayed them. Even those who found peace still bore invisible wounds, reminders of the cost of playing God. One day, as Ethan stood outside the rehabilitation center watching the sunset, Sam joined him. "You did good," Sam said quietly, leaning against the railing. "Better than anyone could have expected." Ethan shook his head. "We stopped one project, but there are probably others out there. How do we know this won't happen again?" Sam sighed. "We don't. But what you and Claire have done, it sends a message. You showed people that they can fight back. That's something." As the sky darkened, Ethan thought about everything they'd been through. The fear, the sacrifices, the lives lost along the way. It had all led to this moment, a fragile but growing sense of hope. They hadn't fixed everything, but they had started something important. Inside the center, laughter echoed faintly from a group of former soldiers playing cards together. For the first time in years, some of them smiled, not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. It was proof that humanity, though fragile, could endure even the darkest trials. And so, Ethan and Claire continued their work, driven by the belief that the scariest part about human armies wasn't the weapons they wielded or the wars they fought. It was the willingness to dehumanize others in the name of progress. By standing up against that darkness, they reminded the world of what truly mattered: compassion, freedom, and the unbreakable spirit of humanity. Back in their small Midwest town, Ethan and Claire wasted no time. The footage they had captured from the facility in Washington was their most powerful weapon yet. They met with Rachel Meyer, the journalist, at a quiet cafe to review the evidence. As they watched the video on Rachel's laptop, her face grew pale. The images were undeniable. Rows of soldiers connected to machines, their blank expressions a stark reminder of what humanity had become under Project Chimera. "This is monstrous," Rachel said finally, her voice shaking. "If we release this, it'll change everything." "That's exactly why we need to get it out there," Ethan replied firmly. "People deserve to know the truth." Rachel nodded. "I'll upload the footage to multiple platforms, along with the documents Sheriff Lewis found. But once this goes public, you too won't be safe. Victor Lang and his people will stop at nothing to silence you." Claire swallowed hard but didn't back down. "We knew the risks when we started this. If we don't act now, who will?" The next morning, the story broke. News outlets across the country picked up the footage, and social media erupted with outrage. Protesters took to the streets, demanding answers from the government. Lawmakers issued statements calling for investigations, while whistleblowers within the military came forward to confirm parts of Ethan and Claire's claims. For the first time, it felt like they were making progress. But victory came at a cost. Within hours of the release, strange cars began appearing around town. Men in dark suits lingered near the garage where Ethan worked and parked outside Claire's house. Phones rang endlessly with block numbers, and every shadow seemed to carry a threat. It was clear that Victor Lang wasn't going to let them expose Project Chimera without a fight. One evening, as Ethan closed up the garage, a man approached him. He wore a trench coat and sunglasses, despite the fading sunlight. "Ethan Carter?" he asked calmly. Ethan froze, his hand tightening around a wrench nearby. "Who are you?" "I'm here to offer you a deal," the man said, ignoring the question. "Stop pushing this story. Drop everything, and you can go back to your normal life." "And if I don't?" Ethan challenged, his voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside him. The man smiled coldly. "Then things will get difficult. For you, for Claire, and for everyone you care about." Before Ethan could respond, the man turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Shaken, Ethan called Claire immediately. She listened quietly before speaking. "They're trying to scare us," she said, "but we can't give up now. Not when we're so close." Determined not to back down, they reached out to Sam, who was finally recovering from his injuries. Together, they devised a plan to protect themselves while keeping the pressure on Victor Lang. With Sheriff Lewis's help, they filed restraining orders against anyone associated with Project Chimera and alerted local authorities to watch for suspicious activity. Their efforts paid off when federal agents arrived in town days later. Armed with warrants, they raided several facilities linked to the defense contractor, uncovering more evidence of unethical experiments. Victor Lang was arrested during one such raid, though his expression remained eerily calm even as handcuffs were placed on his wrists. Despite these victories, Ethan and Claire knew the battle wasn't over. Project Chimera might have been exposed, but its victims, the soldiers stripped of their humanity, still needed help. They vowed to dedicate themselves to finding ways to heal those damaged by the program, starting with rehabilitation programs and support networks. As they stood together watching news reports about the fallout, Claire spoke softly. "Do you think we made a difference?" Ethan looked at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "We did, and we'll keep doing more. Because someone has to." The alarms screamed through the facility, echoing off the walls as Ethan and Claire ran for their lives. Red lights flashed above them, casting eerie shadows across the cold, metallic corridors. Guards shouted orders behind them, their heavy boots pounding against the floor. The sound grew louder with every second, closing in fast. "We need to split up," Ethan yelled over the noise. "They'll catch us if we stay together." Claire hesitated, her heart racing. Splitting up felt like a terrible idea, but she knew he was right. Together, they were an easy target. "Fine," she said, gripping his arm tightly for a moment. "Be careful." With that, they darted in opposite directions. Ethan sprinted down a narrow hallway, ducking into an open doorway just as two guards rounded the corner. He pressed himself against the wall, holding his breath as they passed without noticing him. Inside the room, he found rows of monitors displaying live feeds from cameras throughout the facility. On one screen, he saw Claire running toward what looked like an emergency exit. She was almost there, but soldiers were closing in. Ethan's mind raced. If he could distract them, maybe she'd have a chance to escape. Spotting a fire alarm on the wall, he pulled it hard. Instantly, sprinklers erupted overhead, drenching the area. The sudden chaos gave him the cover he needed. Grabbing a metal pipe from the corner of the room, he stepped out and struck a nearby guard who had turned back to investigate the noise. The man crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Meanwhile, Claire reached the emergency exit and yanked on the handle. To her relief, it opened, spilling cold air into the building. She slipped outside, only to find herself face to face with another group of soldiers waiting in the parking lot. Trapped, she raised her hands slowly, trying to think of a way out. But before they could grab her, a loud explosion rocked the facility. The blast came from deep inside the building, a result of Ethan's desperate attempt to create a diversion. Using a fuel canister he found in a storage closet, he'd rigged a makeshift bomb and set it off near the main control room. Flames roared through the corridor, forcing everyone to scatter. Amid the confusion, Ethan bolted toward the same exit Claire had used moments earlier. When he burst outside, he spotted her surrounded by soldiers. Without thinking, he charged at them, swinging the metal pipe with all his strength. Caught off guard, the soldiers stumbled back, giving Claire the opening she needed. She grabbed Ethan's hand, and they ran together toward the tree line at the edge of the property. Behind them, shouts filled the air as more guards poured out of the burning building. Victor Lang appeared in the chaos, his face twisted with fury. "Stop them," he barked, pointing at Ethan and Claire. "They can't leave here alive." The pair pushed themselves harder than ever, their legs burning as they plunged into the forest. They didn't dare look back until they reached the safety of their car, hidden far enough away to avoid detection. Collapsing into the seats, they panted heavily, their bodies trembling with exhaustion. "We did it," Claire whispered, clutching the camera in her lap. "We got the footage." Ethan nodded, though his relief was tinged with fear. "But they know who we are now. This isn't over." As they drove away, the facility faded into the distance, its silhouette glowing faintly against the night sky. They had escaped, for now, but they both knew the fight was far from finished. Project Chimera wouldn't stop hunting them, not while they still held the truth in their hands. And somewhere out there, Victor Lang was already planning his next move. With Sam recovering in the hospital and Sheriff Lewis working to analyze the evidence from the factory, Ethan and Claire threw themselves into uncovering more about Project Chimera. They knew time was running out. If the operation had moved to a new location, they might never find it again. Every lead mattered, no matter how small. Sheriff Lewis called them to the station one morning, his face serious. "I found something," he said, spreading photos across his desk. "These are serial numbers from some of the equipment left behind at the factory. I ran them through a database, and they're linked to a defense contractor based in Washington State." Claire's eyes widened. "That's where they've gone." "It's possible," the sheriff replied. "But we need to be careful. If this is as big as you say, there's no telling who else is involved. Going after them directly could put all of us in danger." Ethan nodded, though frustration simmered beneath the surface. "So what do we do? Just sit here and wait?" "No," Sheriff Lewis said firmly. "We gather everything we have. Your footage, my photos, anything else we can find, and share it with someone who has the power to act. Someone higher up." They decided to reach out to a journalist named Rachel Meyer, known for her investigative work on government corruption. She lived in Chicago, but she agreed to meet them after hearing their story. When they arrived at her apartment, Rachel listened intently as they explained everything. From the soldiers at the factory to Sam's sacrifice and the clues pointing westward. "This is huge," Rachel said when they finished. "If even half of what you're saying is true, it could blow the lid off one of the biggest scandals in modern history." "But will anyone believe us?" Claire asked nervously. "All we have is second-hand evidence. Rachel tapped a pen against her desk, thinking, "That's why we need to go bigger. We'll upload your footage and the documents online. Multiple platforms, encrypted backups. Once it's out there, it'll be impossible to cover up. But first, we need to verify the information. That means finding proof that ties Victor Lang and this defense contractor to Project Chimera." The group agreed to split up. Rachel would stay behind to prepare the documents for release, while Ethan and Claire traveled to Washington State to investigate the contractor's facility. It was risky, but they didn't have a choice. When they arrived in Washington, they rented a car and drove to the outskirts of town, where the facility was located. From a distance, it looked like any other industrial complex. Large warehouses surrounded by high fences topped with barbed wire. Security cameras scanned the perimeter, and armed guards patrolled the grounds. "We can't just walk in," Ethan muttered, watching through binoculars. "Not without a plan." Claire nodded. "Let's look for weak spots. Maybe there's a way to sneak inside." After hours of observation, they noticed a delivery truck pulling up to a side gate. The driver exchanged papers with a guard, and the gate opened just wide enough for the truck to pass through. An idea formed in Ethan's mind. "What if we pose as delivery drivers?" he suggested. "We steal a uniform and try to blend in." It was a long shot, but Claire agreed. They waited until nightfall, then broke into a nearby warehouse where uniforms were stored. Dressed as workers, they climbed into the back of an empty delivery truck and waited for their chance. The next morning, the truck approached the gate. Ethan held his breath as the guard checked their forged paperwork. For a moment, it seemed like they'd been caught, but then the guard waved them through. Inside the facility, they saw rows of soldiers standing motionless, connected to machines just like before. In the center of the room, Victor Lang stood giving orders, his voice cold and commanding. Ethan quietly activated the camera hidden in his pocket, capturing everything. Suddenly, alarms blared overhead. A guard shouted, pointing at them. They had been discovered. "Run," Claire yelled, grabbing Ethan's hand. As they sprinted toward the exit, they realized the hardest part was yet to come: escaping alive. Ethan and Claire stumbled out of the factory, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The cold night air hit them like a slap, but they didn't stop running until they reached the safety of the woods. Only then did they pause, leaning against trees to catch their breath. Both of them were shaking, not just from the adrenaline, but from fear for Sam. "What do we do now?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. "We can't just leave him there." Claire clenched her fists, her mind racing. "He stayed behind to give us a chance. We can't waste that. But going back in would be suicide." Ethan looked toward the factory, its dark silhouette looming in the distance. "There has to be something we can do. He risked everything for us." Claire nodded, biting her lip. "We need to get help. Someone who can go up against these people. Someone with power." They decided to drive straight to the local sheriff's office. It wasn't much, but it was the only authority they trusted. Sheriff Lewis was an older man, known for his integrity and no-nonsense attitude. When they arrived, they found him sitting at his desk, sipping coffee and reviewing paperwork. He looked up, surprised to see them so late at night. "Sheriff," Claire began, her voice urgent, "we need your help. Something terrible is happening at that old factory on the edge of town." Sheriff Lewis raised an eyebrow. "What kind of trouble are you talking about?" Ethan stepped forward, holding out the camera Sam had used to record the scene inside the factory. "We have proof. Soldiers are being changed. They're not human anymore. And someone named Victor Lang is behind it all." The sheriff frowned, taking the camera and playing the footage. His expression grew darker as he watched the soldiers lying motionless on tables, connected to machines. When the video ended, he leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "This is serious," he said finally. "If what you're saying is true, this isn't just some local issue. This goes way above my pay grade. But you'll help us, right?" Claire pleaded. "Sam's still in there. He stayed behind to save us. Sheriff Lewis hesitated, then nodded. I'll call the state police and see if I can get backup. But until then, I'll check it out myself. You two stay here. Don't go anywhere near that place again. Reluctantly, Ethan and Claire agreed to wait at the station. Hours passed, each minute feeling like an eternity. Finally, Sheriff Lewis returned, his face pale and grim. I found Sam, he said quietly. He's alive, but barely. They roughed him up pretty bad. I called for an ambulance. He's on his way to the hospital. Ethan let out a shaky breath of relief. Thank God. But there's more, the sheriff continued. When I got there, most of the soldiers were gone. The trucks had left, and the factory looked abandoned. Whatever operation they were running, they've packed up and moved out. Claire's heart sank. Does that mean we lost them? Not necessarily, Sheriff Lewis replied. I took photos of the equipment they left behind. There might be clues in there, serial numbers, documents, anything that could lead us to where they went. Over the next few days, Ethan and Claire visited Sam in the hospital. He was weak but determined, insisting they keep pushing forward. Don't stop now, he told them. This fight isn't over. If we don't expose them, they'll just keep doing this somewhere else. With Sam recovering and Sheriff Lewis helping them analyze the evidence, Ethan and Claire felt a renewed sense of purpose. They knew the road ahead would be dangerous, but they also knew they couldn't turn back. The truth about Project Chimera needed to come out, and they were the only ones who could make it happen. The days that followed were tense for Ethan, Claire, and Sam. The image of the young soldier being executed haunted them, a grim reminder of the stakes they were up against. They knew they couldn't turn back now, but moving forward felt like stepping into a storm they weren't sure they could survive. Still, they agreed on one thing. They needed proof, solid, undeniable evidence that would expose Project Chimera to the world. Sam took charge of planning their next move. We can't just rely on photos or guesses, he said. We need something concrete, something they can't deny. If we can get inside that factory and record what's happening, we might have a chance. Ethan frowned. Inside? That's suicide. You saw how quickly they reacted last time. I know, Sam replied, but staying out here isn't going to cut it. We'll go in at night, when most of them are occupied. And we'll stick to the edges, find a way to slip through unnoticed. Claire nodded reluctantly. If we're careful, we might be able to pull it off. But we'll need more than just luck. We'll need tools. Over the next few days, Sam gathered what they needed. A small camera with night vision, a portable recorder, and even a pair of thermal goggles he'd kept from his military days. He also taught Ethan and Claire how to use hand signals to communicate silently. No talking once we're inside, he warned. One wrong sound, and we're done. On the chosen night, the trio approached the factory under the cover of darkness. The air was cold, and the woods were eerily quiet. They moved slowly, sticking to the shadows and avoiding open spaces. When they reached the outer fence, Sam used wire cutters to make a small opening. One by one, they slipped through, hearts pounding in their chests. Inside the compound, the factory loomed ahead, its windows dark except for faint glows coming from within. Soldiers patrolled the area in pairs, their movements mechanical and predictable. Sam motioned for Ethan and Claire to follow him as he led them toward a side entrance. The door was locked, but Sam had come prepared. With a quiet click, the lock gave way, and they stepped inside. The interior was dimly lit, filled with rows of crates and strange machinery. The hum of electricity filled the air, vibrating through the floor beneath their feet. In the distance, they could hear muffled voices, orders being barked out in clipped tones. Sam pointed to a narrow corridor and signaled for them to stay close. As they crept along, Ethan noticed a room with a large glass window. Inside, monitors displayed rows of data, scrolling rapidly across the screens. A man in a lab coat stood nearby, typing furiously on a keyboard. It was Victor Lang. His face was pale and focused, his eyes darting between the screens as if searching for something. Claire nudged Ethan and pointed to another part of the room. Through the glass, they could see soldiers lying motionless on tables, wires connecting their heads to machines. Their bodies twitched occasionally, as if caught in some kind of nightmare. It was horrifying. A glimpse into the heart of Project Chimera. Sam quietly set up the camera, aiming it at the scene. As it recorded, Claire whispered, "This is it. This proves everything." But before they could leave, a sudden noise echoed down the hallway. A metallic clang, sharp and loud. They froze, realizing too late that Ethan had accidentally kicked a loose tool. Footsteps approached quickly, and a soldier appeared around the corner, his weapon raised. "Move," Sam hissed, shoving Ethan and Claire toward the exit. He stayed behind, drawing the soldiers' attention while they escaped. There was a shout, then the sound of scuffling. By the time Ethan and Claire made it outside, Sam was nowhere to be seen. The next day, Ethan and Claire were more cautious than ever. After their close call at the factory, they knew they couldn't keep sneaking around without a plan. They needed help, someone who understood how the military worked and could guide them. Claire suggested reaching out to Sam Dawson, a retired Marine who lived on the edge of town. Sam had served for over 20 years and was known for his sharp mind and quiet strength. Though he kept to himself these days, he might be willing to listen. Ethan wasn't sure about involving someone else. What if he doesn't believe us? Or worse, what if he reports us? Claire shook her head. Sam's different. He's seen enough to know when something isn't right. Besides, we can't do this alone anymore. That evening, they drove to Sam's house. It was a modest place surrounded by tall trees, with a faded American flag hanging on the porch. When Sam opened the door, he looked surprised but invited them in. Over coffee, Ethan and Claire explained everything. The trucks, the soldiers, the man in the suit, and the strange behavior they'd witnessed. At first, Sam listened quietly, his expression unreadable. But as they described the glowing devices and the lifeless expressions of the soldiers, his jaw tightened. "You're telling me you think these soldiers are being controlled?" Sam asked, his voice low. "It's not just a theory," Claire said. "We found documents about Project Chimera. It's real, Sam. They're experimenting on people, turning them into machines." Sam leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "I've heard rumors about programs like this before. Back in my day, they called it enhanced training. But nothing ever came of it, or so we thought." Ethan leaned forward. "So you believe us?" Sam nodded slowly. "I believe something's going on. And if what you're saying is true, it's bigger than any of us. But messing with it, that's dangerous. These kinds of operations don't take kindly to outsiders poking around." "We know it's risky," Claire admitted, "but we can't just ignore it. Those soldiers aren't volunteers. They're victims. If we don't do something, no one will." Sam sighed, looking at the two of them. He could see the determination in their eyes. "All right," he said finally. "I'll help. But we need to be smart about this. No more running into danger blind. We need a strategy." Over the next few hours, they discussed their options. Sam suggested staking out the factory again, but this time with better preparation. He taught them how to move quietly through the woods and how to spot signs of surveillance. He also warned them about the risks. "If they catch you," he said, "they won't hesitate to silence you." The next night, armed with Sam's advice, Ethan and Claire returned to the factory. This time, they stayed even farther away, using binoculars to observe from a safe distance. The scene was much the same as before. Soldiers unloading crates, their movements mechanical and precise. But then, something unexpected happened. One of the soldiers broke away from the group and walked toward the woods, alone. Ethan's heart raced. What's he doing? Claire gripped his arm. "Stay down. Don't move." The soldier stopped near the tree line, scanning the area. Then, to their shock, he removed his helmet. Beneath it was a young man, his face pale and gaunt. His eyes darted around wildly, filled with confusion and fear. For a moment, he looked human again. Before Ethan or Claire could react, another soldier appeared behind him. Without hesitation, the second soldier raised a weapon and fired. The young man collapsed instantly, his body crumpling to the ground. Ethan gasped, covering his mouth to stifle a cry. Claire grabbed his hand, pulling him deeper into the shadows. They didn't dare move until the soldiers had dragged the body back to the factory and disappeared inside. On the drive home, neither of them spoke. The weight of what they'd seen pressed heavily on their shoulders. These soldiers weren't just tools. They were prisoners in their own bodies, disposable when they showed even a hint of humanity. When they told Sam what had happened, his expression hardened. "This changes things," he said grimly. "We're not just fighting to expose the truth anymore. We're fighting to save lives." And deep down, Ethan and Claire knew he was right. The next morning, Ethan and Claire sat at her kitchen table, staring at the photograph of the man in the suit. The image was blurry, but his face was clear enough to recognize if they could find a match. Claire suggested they visit the local library, where she had access to old newspapers and online databases. "If this guy is involved in something big, there's a chance he's been mentioned somewhere," she said. Ethan wasn't so sure. What if he's not even from around here? What if he's part of some secret group we've never heard of? Claire shrugged. "It's worth a shot. We can't just sit around and do nothing." They spent hours poring over articles and records, searching for any mention of military experiments or mysterious figures connected to the government. At first, they found nothing useful, but then, buried deep in an archive of leaked documents, Claire stumbled upon something. It was a report from several years ago, detailing a classified program called Project Chimera. The name sent a chill down her spine. "What does it say?" Ethan asked, leaning over her shoulder. "It talks about experiments to enhance soldiers," Claire explained, her voice low. "They wanted to make them stronger, faster, and more obedient. But look at this part. It says they used neural implants to control their behavior." Ethan frowned. "Control their behavior? You mean like programming them?" "Exactly," Claire replied. "It says the goal was to remove fear and hesitation, so the soldiers would follow orders without question. But there were risks. Some of the test subjects became unstable, or worse." Ethan felt a knot form in his stomach. "That sounds exactly like what we saw last night. Those soldiers weren't acting like normal people because they're not normal anymore. They've been turned into machines." Claire nodded grimly. "And whoever that man in the suit is, he's probably running the show." Determined to dig deeper, they decided to focus on identifying him. Using the photo Ethan had taken, they compared it to images of known military officials and contractors. After hours of searching, they finally found a match. The man's name was Victor Lang, a former scientist who had worked for a defense contractor before disappearing from public view. Rumors linked him to unethical experiments, but nothing had ever been proven. "That's him," Claire whispered, pointing to the screen. "Victor Lang. He must be behind all of this." Ethan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "So what do we do now? Go to the police?" Claire shook her head. "We don't have enough proof. All we have are blurry photos and some old documents. No one will believe us unless we get hard evidence." Ethan sighed. "Then I guess we'll have to go back to the factory." The idea made both of them uneasy, but they knew it was the only way to uncover the truth. That night, armed with a flashlight and a small recording device, they returned to the edge of the woods near the factory. This time, they stayed farther away, hoping to avoid detection. From their vantage point, they watched as trucks continued to arrive, unloading more crates. Soldiers moved in perfect synchronization, carrying equipment inside. Suddenly, Ethan noticed something strange. One of the soldiers paused mid-step, tilting their head slightly as though listening to something. Then, without warning, They turned and began walking toward the woods, toward Ethan and Claire. "Get down," Claire hissed, pulling Ethan to the ground. They lay flat, holding their breath, as the soldiers scanned the area. For a moment, it seemed like they'd been spotted. But then the soldier turned and walked back to the factory, resuming their task as if nothing had happened. Ethan exhaled shakily. That was too close. Claire nodded, her hands trembling. "We need to be smarter next time. If we want answers, we can't keep risking our necks like this." As they slipped away into the darkness, neither of them realized how much danger they were truly in, or how far Victor Lang would go to protect his secrets. The next day, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about what he and Claire had seen at the factory. The soldier's strange behavior and the glowing device haunted his thoughts. He tried to focus on his work at the garage, but his mind kept drifting back to the scene. Something about those soldiers felt wrong, unnatural, even. By late afternoon, he decided to call Claire. They needed to talk more about what they had witnessed. Claire was already waiting for him when he arrived at her house. She had spent the morning researching online, trying to find anything that might explain the mysterious convoy and the soldiers. Her laptop was open on the kitchen table, surrounded by notes and printed articles. "I think I found something," she said as Ethan sat down. "There have been rumors about secret military projects in rural areas. Some people claim the government is testing new technologies." Ethan frowned. "New technologies? Like what?" "I'm not sure yet," Claire admitted. "But it's possible those soldiers we saw are part of some kind of experiment. Maybe they're using advanced gear, or something else." "Something else," Ethan echoed. "What do you mean?" Claire hesitated. "I don't know how to say this without sounding crazy, but what if they're not entirely human? Their movements last night, they were too perfect, like machines. And that blue light, it looked like it was connected to them somehow." Ethan shook his head. "That does sound crazy. But then again, so does everything else about this." Determined to learn more, they decided to get closer to the factory the following night. This time, they brought binoculars and a small camera. As darkness fell, they parked their car farther away from the site and approached on foot. The air was cool and quiet, broken only by the distant hum of crickets. When they reached the edge of the woods near the factory, they crouched behind a cluster of trees and observed. Inside the building, the soldiers were busy unloading crates from the trucks. Each crate was marked with symbols Ethan didn't recognize, geometric shapes arranged in patterns that made no sense. Occasionally, one of the soldiers would pause and tap a glowing panel on their wrist. The blue light Claire had mentioned earlier pulsed faintly, almost like it was communicating with something. Ethan raised the camera and zoomed in. Through the lens, he noticed something alarming. The soldiers' faces were eerily blank, their expressions frozen in a neutral state. Even when they interacted with each other, there was no emotion. No anger, frustration, or even curiosity. It was as though they weren't truly alive. "This isn't right," Ethan muttered under his breath. "They're not acting like normal people." Claire nodded, her face pale in the dim moonlight. "It's like they're being controlled." Before they could discuss it further, a loud voice interrupted their observation. One of the soldiers standing near the entrance shouted an order, and the others immediately stopped what they were doing. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man in a dark suit, flanked by two guards. Unlike the soldiers, he moved with authority, barking commands into a handheld device. His presence seemed to command respect, or fear, from everyone around him. Ethan adjusted the camera to get a better look at the man's face. Just as he snapped a photo, the sound of footsteps startled them. Someone was approaching their hiding spot. Without thinking, Ethan grabbed Claire's arm and pulled her deeper into the woods. They ran blindly, branches scraping against their skin, until they'd reached the safety of their car. Back at Claire's house, they reviewed the pictures Ethan had taken. The man in the suit was clearly visible in one of the shots, his sharp features illuminated by the glow of his device. "We need to find out who he is," Claire said firmly. If we can identify him, maybe we can figure out what's really going on. Ethan agreed, though unease settled in his chest. Whatever they had stumbled upon was bigger than they imagined, and far more dangerous. In a quiet town in the Midwest, life moved at a slow and predictable pace. The streets were lined with old oak trees, and neighbors knew each other by name. Ethan Carter had lived there his entire life. He worked as a mechanic, fixing cars and trucks for the townsfolk. Despite his simple job, Ethan had always been curious about the world beyond their small community. He spent his evenings reading books about history, especially stories of wars and armies. It wasn't that he wanted conflict. He just found it fascinating how people organized themselves to fight. One evening, as Ethan closed up his garage, he noticed something unusual. A convoy of large black trucks rolled down Main Street, their engines rumbling softly in the quiet night. They weren't marked with any logos or flags, just plain and unassuming. Ethan stopped what he was doing and watched them pass. Trucks like these didn't usually come through town. Most deliveries were made during the day, and even then, they were from familiar companies. These vehicles felt different, out of place. The next morning, Ethan mentioned what he'd seen to Claire Mitchell, a biology teacher at the local high school. Claire was known for her sharp mind and curiosity. She often joked that she could spot a mystery from miles away. When Ethan told her about the trucks, her eyes lit up with interest. "That's strange," she said. "I didn't hear anything about construction projects or military exercises around here." Ethan shrugged. "Maybe it's nothing." But those trucks looked off, like they didn't want anyone to notice them. Claire frowned. "You're probably right. This town doesn't get much attention. Why would someone send unmarked trucks through here?" Over coffee, they decided to do a little digging. That night, Ethan and Claire drove out to the edge of town, where the trucks had seemed to disappear. They parked their car behind some bushes and waited. Hours passed, and just when they thought nothing would happen, the sound of engines broke the silence. The same black trucks appeared again, heading toward an old factory on the outskirts of town. The building had been abandoned for years, its windows shattered and walls covered in graffiti. Ethan grabbed a flashlight and motioned for Claire to follow him. Carefully, they crept closer to the factory. Peering through a broken window, they saw soldiers moving inside. But these weren't ordinary soldiers. Their movements were too precise, almost robotic. They wore uniforms without insignias, and their faces were expressionless. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. Something about them didn't feel human. "Do you see that?" Claire whispered, pointing to one of the soldiers. He held a device in his hand, glowing faintly with blue light. It looked advanced, far beyond anything Ethan had ever seen. "We need to be careful," Ethan replied. "Whatever this is, it's not normal." As they watched, one of the soldiers suddenly turned their way. For a moment, Ethan thought they'd been spotted. His heart raced, but the soldier simply adjusted his stance and continued working. Claire tugged on Ethan's sleeve. "Let's go," she urged. "We can't stay here." Reluctantly, Ethan agreed. They hurried back to their car and drove home in silence. Neither of them spoke until they reached Claire's house. "What do you think they're doing here?" she asked finally. "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "But I have a feeling we've stumbled onto something big." Little did they know, their discovery would change everything, for better or worse.